So yeah, after a long break from the game, I'm still, as I say, on a semi-break. I'm trying to log in, I'm trying to play as much as I can, but it's still very, very infrequent. But after a long break from the game, I finally came back and I discovered the light tank changes. Now, one of the final videos I made before an extended break was a T-37 ace tanker, and I was looking at the nerfs, and I wasn't very positive about the light tank changes that Wargaming were planning to make between 9.17, 9.18. The T-37 seemed to be nerfed into the ground, and a lot of the other tanks at that time were the discussions were that they were being nerfed into the ground, and one of the biggest tanks that in the super test stats that was being nerfed was the AMX 1390. The super test stats for this tank were bloody awful, absolutely awful. So basically they'd moved this tank up one tier, which is fine because technically it was always a tier 9 being a light tank, but they hadn't made very many other changes. They nerfed the view range, and that was pretty much it. They gave it a few more hit points, so it was going to be a big nerf for the 1390, but after the super test changes, I mean, it only had 170 millimeters of pen with its standard AP, or APCR, or whatever it was using back then. After the super test changes came about, it became a very, very good tier 9 medium tank. So I'm just going to pop into Tanks GG. So on the left, we've got the 1390 as it is in game at the moment, and on the right, we've got the 1390 as it was in game in 9.17 before I took my extended break. In fact, I didn't play any games in 9.17 at all. It wasn't until, I think I played between 9.16 and 9.18 or 9.18.1 before I managed to get back and play. But so I missed out on 9.17 completely, but regardless, the original changes showed this tank being nerfed hugely, but by the time it made it into the game, which is why you really shouldn't take super tests statistics very, very seriously, by the time it had completed or gone through the super test, we ended up with this thing at tier 9. And compared to the tank at tier 8, it had more DPM, it had a huge amount of penetration, 205 compared to the original 170. The rate of fire had been increased, the reload time had almost been halved from 40 seconds for a 6 clip down to 22 seconds for a 4 clip, which was the next major change. They took 2 shots out of the autoloader and reduced it down to 4, but they increased the penetration while keeping the alpha damage. But that increase of reload time meant that the DPM basically increased by a huge amount at tier 9. They buffed the shell velocity. They made it 1163 compared to the original 930. They basically increased the amount of ammo it could carry and the potential damage it could do. So even with a smaller clip, more ammo meant it could do more damage. They reduced the aim time, so the aim time was a little bit better. They kept the accuracy from when it was a tier 8, but they increased, or they buffed the accuracy while moving the tank, while traversing, and while moving the turret. So it's all good. It is basically all good. About the only negative so far is that the fact you've only got 4 shots in your clip compared to 6. Then we come back down to mobility. You can see they also buffed the mobility significantly by giving it a better engine at tier 9, which increases the horsepower to weight ratio, which increases the mobility, the going up hills, the accelerating to its top speed, which remained the same. The reverse speed remained the same, but they did nerf it slightly on traversing the tank. So even though the traverse speed, you can see the tank traverse here on both the tier 8 version and the tier 9 version, 41.71 tank traverse. It's exactly the same, but again, hidden nerfs. They nerfed the actual traverse on hard, medium, and soft ground. So again, this is not an accurate stat, even though it might say this in the garage. It actually did get a nerf regarding its turning ability, but the hull armor, turret armor, the health was improved slightly, but not by much between tier 8 and tier 9. But pretty much everything remained the same. The ammo rack got less effective. As I say, these are stealth nerfs that weren't mentioned anywhere. I think pretty much every game or every tank in the game got its ammo ammo rack health nerfed, because you get ammo racked so frequently in no matter what tank you're playing now. But they did nerf the view range. That's about the only change they kept from the super test, other than the size of the clip. So the view range got nerfed down to 380 from the 400 it was at tier 8. So it seems to be a much better tank all round. Oh, shell cost also increased, even though technically it's similar alpha damage, but so it's a little bit more expensive to run as a tier 9 than it was as a tier 8. But so view range was pretty much the only nerf. The clip size can be overlooked because of the increased DPM and the faster reload. So it's basically a much better tank at tier 9 than it was at tier 8, and when it was first announced and it was on super test, it was far worse. So anyway, I got back to the game and I started playing my light tanks again, after discovering that now with these tanks at tier 9 I had to, even though I'd finished all the light tanks, I love my light tanks, but I'd finished all my light tanks, I'd gotten up to tier 8 in all the light tanks. You know, now I suddenly had to grind out 200 plus experience on all my tier 8 light tanks, because they're now either tier 8 or tier 9. So yeah, a lot more grinding. I'm finally had to get back into my light tanks. But we are here on Cliff, and this is my very first game in the brand new 1390. Very first game in the brand new 1390. But I've talked about the history and everything of this tank on its Ace Tanker previously, and I've kind of forgotten most of it, but I'm not going to go through the history, because this is kind of a video about light tank changes. So I tracked the RU-251 first shot, second shot didn't track him, got another shot in, got one shot left in the clip, and I really advanced aggressively here on Cliff to try and stop light tanks from getting up into that position, because I hate light tanks in that position. But anyway, we're gone for a reload, and we're enjoying this new 20-second reload, because you can see I'm using coffee on this tank, so my reload is about 20 seconds, which is awesome. And we're just going to work here. But yeah, the light tanks, really enjoying my light tanks. I've had to go back and grinding light tanks again, because, as I say, I pretty much finished all my light tanks. And the 1390 is just awesome. I'm really enjoying it. This is my first game back. I'm testing out the tank. I'm basically doing what I did in the past, which is a little bit of scouting but more damage dealing, because I think French light tanks are more damage dealers than a lot of other light tanks. They can scout, but they can damage deal probably as well, or if not better, than most other light tanks. 1390 was always that. It was always a damage dealer / scout. But yeah, so as I say, we've got new light tanks in the game, we've got new standard light tank content, and you know, always new light tank content, or new content of any type is always good. So you know, I've got a reason to play my light tanks again. As I say, I'd maxed out all the lines to tier 8, and now I can grind and do light tank missions again. So yeah, there were major changes. The big one I was worried about was the standard matchmaking. You know, in my video about the T-37 before taking an extended break, I was very skeptical. I was very skeptical about the nerfs the light tanks seemed to be getting. Even if they were going to get standard matchmaking, I was skeptical. I thought the nerfs were a little bit too... They basically went too far. It was too much. But I'm going to put my hand up here and say I was completely wrong. I was completely wrong. The standard matchmaking for light tanks, I was completely unprepared when I came back to the game. You know, before the changes, I was reading about the nerfs and seeing about how, you know, instead of seeing tanks 3 tiers higher, as they did when I was playing the light tanks last time, now they would only be seeing tanks that were 2 tiers higher. And I thought, as I say, the nerfs were too severe. But I was wrong, and I'll put my hand up completely and say I was wrong. Oh, got lucky not to take any damage from the T-28 prototype there, but we're just doing damage here. We're basically taking out enemy tanks. Let me fix this here. But yeah, I'm gonna put my hand up and say I was completely wrong. We still got the gun elevation problem on the AMX 1390, but yeah, get one shot in. And yeah, okay, 0.36 accuracy. So there's a Yag Tiger, there's an RU-251 up to my right, so a little bit careful here. But yeah, I was wrong. I was completely wrong about the light tanks. There's the 251 just getting a proxy spotted. I'm almost reloaded, but I'm worried about these light tanks behind me, or the TDs behind me. So Yeah, he's popping out for a shot. He misses. So lots of TDs camping. I'm a little bit worried. Don't really want to go up and get this guy because, yeah, this is so dangerous. Because the TD's gonna easily wreck me, but yeah, I gotta go, gotta move. This RT in play, I've just lost a lot of health, and it was the TD, it was the Scorpion G, it did 491 damage to me, so that was maybe a little bit stupid, but I really wanted to kill the RU-251, and I've left him on 24 health, so I don't know if that was worth it, but yeah, anyway, we're up to 3,000 damage already, but yeah, I was wrong. As I say, I keep on losing track. Completely wrong about the light tank changes. The nerfs were really much needed, because even though they weren't seeing tanks 3 tiers higher and we're only seeing tanks 2 tiers higher, I didn't consider the possibility of light tanks being top tier, or even light tanks being mid tier. I was so used to them being bottom tier. I made the false assumption that light tanks would still be bottom tier. They would only, but instead of seeing tier 9s, they would only see tier 8s. And I thought, light tanks would normally be bottom tier, but they would only see tanks 2 tiers higher. And that was so wrong. I was blown away. As I say, when I was top tier in my light tank in my first match back, I can't remember which light tank it was, but it wasn't the 1390. This is my first game back in the 1390. But I was top tier, and I was blown away. And essentially, I'm going to put my hand up and say I was wrong, because without the nerfs to most of the light tanks, I think they would have been far too powerful with the ability of being top tier or even mid tier. So as far as my light tank experience has gone so far, I'm going to say Wargaming did a good job, because, the T-37, I was critical about the nerfs, because instead of seeing tier 9s, it would only see tier 8s now, but I forgot that T-37 would also see tier 4s, and it would have been completely, or would have seen tier 7s instead of tier 8s, or whatever it is. But yeah, with the T-37 and without its nerfs, it was top tier against tier 4s, and that would have been completely unfair without the nerfs. So yeah, I was very shocked at basically how well balanced most of the light tanks I've played are now, considering they actually get top tier, or can get top tier. So I was completely wrong on that call. Yeah, as I say, hand up, I'm wrong. I think the light tank changes and the nerfs they received were very good. Yeah, it wasn't all good. Basically, right now, coming back to the game and playing light tanks again, I discovered that I've got to grind out over 1 million experience on tanks I'd already completed. 1 million experience I need to play and grind out on tanks I've already completed. So yeah, that's something that I'm kind of happy because I'm playing light tanks again, but I'm also kind of unhappy because I don't have as much time to play the game anymore. And I thought the removal of the camo, so a lot of the tanks I had at tier 8 were moved to tier 9, and Wargaming removed their camo. And to be perfectly honest, I thought that was a bit of a dick move, excuse the language, by Wargaming. Yes, you got the gold back if you had gold camo on your tier 8 light tanks. You got refunded, you got your gold back, and it showed up in your account, but the cost of putting gold camo, on a tier 9 is a lot higher than putting it on a tier 8. So they removed the camo from the tier 8, they moved the tank to tier 8, and then they took, so you had to put your camo back on. And yes, you may have got refunded for your tier 8, but essentially you didn't get as much gold value back as was on the tank previously. So, you got what you paid, but to put camo on your tier 9s as they are now, even though you owned them and had the tanks already, compared to putting the gold on your tier 9s, you can't afford to. You basically couldn't put camo if you had no gold and you got the gold back from your tier 8s. You didn't have enough gold to put them back on exactly the same tanks at tier 9. So I mean, Wargaming, I don't know why they made that decision, but the only reason I can think of is that so that people would spend more gold on the game. So Wargaming essentially made money, with that decision, because people had to spend more gold in order to put camo back on their light tanks. And you need camo on your light tanks. There we go. You need camo on your light tanks. I'm sick and tired of seeing players playing light tanks with no camo. Tier 9, tier 10 light tanks with no camo. What are you doing, people? Please, please put camo on your light tanks. If there's one class of tanks in the game that needs camo, especially at high tier, it is light tanks. So you need to pay your credits, you need to pay your gold. Put camo on light tanks, please. But yeah, so that was probably my biggest annoyance, because can't afford to spend money on the game anymore, and the fact that I got my gold value back for tier 8 camo and then had to put it back on the tier 9s, and it ended up costing me more gold than I got back. I was very unhappy with that decision. I mean, I suppose it's a smart business decision by Wargaming, but I thought it was kind of sly. I thought it was a bit of a dick move. But anyway, there we go. This is my first game back in the 1390 after coming back to the game, and I was very impressed. Yes, I was. It took me a while to get back into the game. It took me a while to start earning aces again. But yeah, this is my first game back in the 1390. We picked up an ace, we picked up a Confederate, picked up high caliber. And as I say, French light tanks are kind of a cross between a damage dealer and a scout. They can do both equally well. Some tanks are better at scouts, some tanks are better at maybe damage dealing, but this is good at both, and I really enjoy playing the 1390 again. So yeah, as you can see, 919-1 played on the 22nd of August, or June. So yeah, my first game back, and I picked up an ace in this, so I don't think I was worried. I was so worried that the 1390, when I left the game, the 1390 was in a terrible state, but having been released now and having gone through the super test and having a lot of the changes that were made to it actually buffed and made better, I think the 1390 is a great tank. So 5k damage, 4 kills, 13-13 was enough to pick up an ace. We fired 29 shots, hit 24 out of 24, so the gun dispersion is better, shooting on the move, shooting while turning the tank and turning the turret. The accuracy is the same as it was in the past, but the shell velocity and the aim time both got buffed, and they're big changes. So we spotted 4, did 1500 1600 assistance damage or spotting damage, so you could still scout in this, and it's a really good damage dealer. We finished with 23,000 credits profit, mainly down to the fact I'm using a premium consumable on the tank. But yeah, first game of the day was a ×4, and first game in the tank in probably about 6 months, because I'd finished the grind, I hadn't been playing it, and then the changes happened and I have to get back into it and grind it out again. So I probably hadn't played the 1390 in probably 6, 7, maybe even 8 months, and that was my first game back in it, and I loved it. I loved it, guys. So if you haven't got your hands on a 1390, or you had one when it was a tier 8 and you sold it to move on to tier 9 or tier 10, consider rebuying it. I think the 1390 is incredibly good. It really is incredibly good. But anyhow, light tank changes. I'm going to put up my hand. And say I was completely wrong. I was a little bit pessimistic. I was a little bit worried about the future of light tanks. But the changes of the matchmaker were completely unfounded, because instead of them seeing tanks 3 times higher, they could only see tanks 2 tiers higher. But I just never took into consideration the fact they could be top tier or mid tier, that they weren't going to be bottom tier all the time. And I think the changes were very positive, even if it meant a lot of the light tanks had to be nerfed. And the only thing I'm really disappointed about was the fact that Wargaming, for some unknown it's pretty much known, a bit of a gold grab. They basically removed camo and made you put camo back on the same tank you had already, a tier higher, which was more expensive, and therefore Wargaming made gold out of that particular decision, so or made money out of that particular decision. So a little bit annoyed, but other than that, yeah, I'm enjoying my light tanks. I'm back, not playing regularly, but yeah, light tank changes were one of the big shocks to me coming back to the game. Anyhow, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.